As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a first-time guest tonight. Greg Crowe, the president and CEO of Silver One Resources, is here with us on Reluctant Preppers. Greg, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dunnigan. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you.
We'd really like to plunge into a number of questions regarding specifically the topic of silver. Our audience is often quite interested in silver as it's a form of real money and a way of holding their assets and their wealth outside of vulnerability of the banking establishment. But you've got a special inside track to what's going on in the silver market because you're involved directly in silver production. So if we could first tap your brain a bit about the uniqueness of silver and why it deserves our attention, especially for those who may be new and joining our channel. Basic question to start with is why silver? What are the major factors you're aware of that have driven historical interest in silver, and why it deserves our attention even today?
Well, I think silver historically has been very important with respect to being, shall we say, a guardian of wealth. It was the dominant currency up until the beginning of the 1900s, when effectively the U.S. went on to the gold standard. And prior to that, most of the coins in the U.S. were predominantly silver. There was more abundant silver, cheaper to produce, etc. Now, that changed, as I said, in the late 1800s to 1900 when they went on the gold standard, and since that time, silver has, shall we say, become the poorer cousin to gold. But at the same time, silver has also grown and become unique into itself in the sense that it is also becoming a industrial commodity. It is sort of revered for its antibacterial qualities. It is very good with respect to its light properties. It used to be very important in the photography field, of course, but now we seem to be what's taking precedence along those lines would be the usage in solar panels, etc. And it's certainly, very important with respect to electronics and growing usage. So silver, I think, is a very interesting commodity, although it does not trade at the same levels as gold. It certainly is both a precious metal and at the same time an industrial commodity, and will always be valuable for both sides of that coin.
Speaking about the trading, you mentioned not trading the same as gold. And you mentioned it also being sort of like gold's poorer cousin. If you could contrast to us when the gold and silver prices fluctuate as market dynamics dictate, is there anything sort of characteristic about the order, who goes first, who goes second, who moves faster and sharper, as far as how silver behaves financially in price action compared to gold, both in timing, during boom times and not so much? Okay.
Well, first of all, they're somewhat tied together in the sense that as gold goes up, silver goes up and vice versa, or they go down, because they are both very important with respect to being hedges against inflation, being essentially hedges against time of economic instability, crises, etc. But at the same time, they do move about at different rates and different times. And one indicator, of course, is what's referred to as the gold-silver ratio, which has to be really followed and sort of studied to be really understood. If you look historically, the price of gold to the price of silver historically from time memoriam is essentially about 15 to 1. Since the U.S. went on to the gold standard in around early 1900s, the historic ratio rose to about 40 to 1. Within recent times, that ratio has increased to 70 to 1. Now, what's interesting as well, only 4 to 5 years ago, during the time of economic downturn after the Great Recession and subprime mortgage crisis of 2008. Essentially in 2011, that gold-silver ratio actually dropped exponentially down to 35 to 1 and has recently climbed up again to 70 to 1. So what is a historical average? Good question, because times have changed from time immemorial, of course. But I would say the last 100 years, you're looking at a ratio of about 40 to 1. We've seen it as low as 35 to 1 in the last 5 years. Currently, we're at 71. I think silver is in for a correction. That ratio could change, and as a consequence, we're going to see silver prices increase in the not-too-distant future.
What can you help us understand? What is the natural basis for this gold to silver ratio? Is it based on? We've heard, like David Morgan and others have talked about the mineral deposit ratio of what they come out of the ground and how production has happened. But where does this ratio come from in the first place?
Well, first of all, if you look, just do a crude comparison as to what's happened, say, in the last 30 to 40 years. We can sort of plot recessions, period of inflation, periods of crises, etc. During the big downturn in the, say, oil crises in the late 1970s, early 1980s, we saw a real decrease in that gold-silver ratio, almost back down to 15 to 1. And then when we saw the rising inflation rates in the mid to late 1980s, we saw a decrease in that ratio again. And then we saw another big decrease at the end of sustained growth during the 1990s, around the time of the dot-com bubble, and of course the September 11th crisis. We saw again a decrease in that ratio. And then we go ahead to the Great Recession, if you wish, of 2008, and we saw a decreasing of that ratio again, and recently as much as 5 years ago. But that said, overall, that ratio, which sits currently today at 70 to 1, if you look at the amount of metal being mined, you're only producing 10 times as much silver as you are gold, and yet the gold-silver ratio is 70 to 1. It's out of sync, and something has to give. Now, some people have talked about conspiracy theories of manipulation of silver prices and silver markets, manipulation of gold markets, etc. I'm not sure whether it's that simple, but I think that there has been a sustained decrease in the amount of silver that has been produced. There's been a 10% decrease in the amount of silver produced in Mexico alone over the last year, and that's been sustained over the last several years. And with that, there has to be an upcoming increase in the price of silver. And I think that increase in the price of silver will probably, on a percentage basis, be greater than the increase in price of gold.
Yeah, based on the numbers you were talking about, from the sort of the trough to the peak, that 35 to 1 up to 70 to 1, or the inverse of that, it makes it sound like there's a potential for silver to outperform gold roughly on like a 2 to 1 ratio in a next big run-up. So
sure. I mean, if you were to say, okay, let's keep gold prices currently at the same level, $11.50 or whatever it is, okay, going forward. And let's say that price ratio corrected itself, went from, say, 70 to 1 down to 50 or 45 to 1 or something, which, we saw not too long ago, then essentially you're going to see an increase in silver prices that will go from the current $16.50 to probably $23 to $24. And that's just a simple correction of the market. That can also come about by decrease in supply of silver or an increased usage and demand for silver. And of course, if we are going to see an increase in infrastructure spending, etc., in the U.S., which has been predicted, then we're going to see increased demand in silver.
One other factor that you mentioned was industrial consumption of silver. The point's been made to us before that most of the gold that is extracted from the ground is held in basically above ground in investable form, but that the majority of silver gets consumed from industrial uses, either in electronics and so on, and that so that even means that silver, the scarcity of it accentuates the scarcity of silver, investable silver, as compared to gold. That the ratio.
100%. Gold essentially is kept in bars and vaults. It's kept in coins. By collectors. It's kept as jewelry, which sometimes is worn and sometimes put away in safes. There is some industrial use to gold, but nowhere on the scale that there is for silver. Very little silver, as actually in comparison to its industrial uses, is socked away into, shall we say, deep vaults somewhere. There are some groups that are storing and stockpiling silver, but overall, in comparison to gold, nowhere near the same amount.
If we could turn your attention to current events, and there's been major things happening recently in the global economic situation. There's been policy decisions. We've had just things such as the election of Donald Trump rather than the favored candidate of Hillary Clinton, who is said to be more of a favored one of the banking industry and of the essentially the elite power structure, globalism in particular. So the Brexit vote from in England, the election of Donald Trump seeming also to be kind of a nationalist move. Just yesterday, Italy voting down, staying as part of the EU and having to exit of its leader associated with that. So those are certainly some major events that are happening in the political spectrum. There's certainly been a number of things happening on the economic scene, such as the inclusion of the Chinese yuan in the by the International Monetary Fund in the specific drawing rights, SDR, so-called basket of currencies, that people have said spells a tipping point, a signpost pointing the direction of loss of prestige and world reserve trading status in the future for the U.S. dollar. If you could point to what you consider to be the most significant current events that are signposts pointing to a future that's very influential for the value and importance of silver, what would those major events be, and how are they related to silver's future?
Okay. I could say all of the above, but I'll be a little more specific, okay? Because they are all variable factors which are going to contribute to what I believe is going to be a very strong market for silver and gold coming up 2017, 2018. What timing frame, I can't say exactly, but what are the big events that have transpired? First of all, we've had a sustained period of, shall we say, globalization. There has been a redistribution of wealth around the globe. We've seen the growth of China and other emerging markets, and at the same time we've seen a lot of the manufacturing base leave the United States, loss of jobs. People are insecure. People are scared. We've seen Europe start to implode in the sense that they can no longer sustain the growth due to, the major recession coming about in the 2008-2009 period, and then followed after 2011. It doesn't look very promising for world currencies. What we're seeing right now, of course, is a very strong U.S. dollar. But what I believe is we're not seeing a strong U.S. dollar. We are seeing weakened other currencies, so the U.S. dollar looks good in comparison. That being said, going forward, we're looking at the election of Trump. Trump was elected because people are tired of the status quo. They're tired of living in fear. Trump promised them something going forward. That was a reemergence of a strong U.S. economy and a return to growth. Can he deliver? Well, there's something out there called debt, and it's incredible the amount of debt which has accrued just within the last 20 years. Even within the period of the Obama administration, the debt has skyrocketed. That debt has to be paid sometime. And can Donald Trump essentially grow the U.S. economy and get out of debt by growing the U.S. economy? I don't think so, because I think his program of infrastructure spending, which is going to require an awful lot of printing of money, you're going to see a return to spending, a return to inflation, and a return to increased debt. that will be good for gold. That will be good for silver.
In general, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. What we've seen for the past 8 years of the Obama administration is a doubling of the U.S. national debt. The quotation is that Obama added as much debt to the United States as all previous presidents in the previous 200 years of the country's history combined, and yet over the Obama presidency, we see that there was this amazing suppression, if you want to call it that, or at least is downward action for a lot of the time in gold and silver prices. So why wouldn't we expect just more of that for unending? That the debt can continue to double and double under Trump and whoever comes after him, and gold and silver could continue to be suppressed. Is there an end game to that?
Well, there has to be an end game. You can only go so far. Now, just really, in order to defend Obama a little bit, is that he did inherit a mess from essentially previous administrations that spent a lot of money on wars, on other, issues which, led the U.S. into an increased debt situation, and that brought about the whole crisis of 2008, which he inherited. And he did essentially continue to increase the debt. And will Trump continue to do that? I believe he will, but it has to come to a point where it's got to stop. And at what point will that stop? Will it stop when China runs out of selling its U.S. bonds? Will China get out of its current economic recession, or will it continue to slide? What happens if the European economies continue to disintegrate? Then essentially you're going to see people becoming more and more afraid and taking some safety against inflation, against recession, against whatever crisis comes up. And again, those are the perfect storms for silver and gold.
That leads us to the individual. Our channel, the purpose and mission of our channel is all about helping people to be aware and prepared. So given that coming storm that we can't keep doubling the debt forever, that there will be eventually a loss of confidence. I heard Jim Rickards today referring that to he called it an invisible confidence boundary gets crossed. No one can really predict and point, it's exactly at this level that's where the confidence is going to break down. But eventually it gets
only in
crossed.
hindsight.
In hindsight, yeah. And then suddenly there's a flight to the exit, and it's like a game of musical chairs where suddenly there aren't enough chairs to go around. In this case, there isn't enough physical gold and silver to go around. So what forms of individual preparedness do you think about, and do you advise to people who ask for your advice if they want to prepare their family for the coming storm?
Okay, well, first of all, read voraciously, okay? And read good material out there, because there are some good indicators of what's going to happen. Let's just look at the gold-silver ratio, for instance. What I do is, mind you, it's part of my job as well, but I like to read the newspapers. The Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal are great newspapers. You don't have to read them in depth. Just catch key stories that talk about economic downturn, recession predictions, etc. Look at commodities. If you're a Canadian resident, you want to be looking at the National Financial Post or the Globe and Mail business section, which are excellent in terms of covering mining companies, and that's very important. You want to go on to kitco.com because you can get current metal prices and up-to-date articles and videos and commentaries with people like myself and other people in the mining industry. You can go to Stockwatch. You can click on current company prices. You can look at the daily articles, and you can even look at the gold-silver ratio, which is posted on the front page of that website. All these things are going to tell you, if you start seeing that gold-silver ratio change dramatically from 70 to 1, and I'm not talking about going down to 68, I'm talking about suddenly if it drops down to 60, you want to get into silver. Do you want to get into silver metal, bars, jewelry, or do you want to get into silver stocks? If you've done your research and you know there are good companies out there, then I think that the return on a good silver stock in an upturning market will far exceed the actual return than what you would get from a bar of silver.
If you could talk to us just a little bit about what happens in a bull market. We've had a number of guests on our channel talking about us still, even though there's been about a 2-month downturn most recently in what was a bullish leg, said we're still in a secular bull market for gold and silver. So how do you expect, first of all, you mentioned earlier that silver will tend to outperform gold in the upward legs of a bull market. What about the difference between owning bullion and coins versus owning mining shares and the producers of precious metals during a bull market?
Yep, you always have to take into account what is your taste for risk, okay? Less risky to hold bullion. It might go up and down in value, but it's not going to go up and down in value as much as, say, a mining stock. If you are on the uptrend, you can have a good chance of making a significant return on a good mining stock. Whereas I said, bullion, you'll make a return, but not necessarily the same. And the chances are you're not going to be buying and selling your bullion. You're going to be hanging on to it. Whereas stocks, if you watch them on a regular basis, then you can make some fairly significant returns. We've seen some precious metal stocks just over the last several months, barring the last couple of months, rise 100 to 200 to 300%. And then we've seen them come roaring back down as the price of precious metals has gone down post-Trump election, which was unexpected. But that's what happens in these markets. But my belief is that's going to turn around, and if you do sit on those stocks as opposed to divesting yourself of them in a downturn market, you're going to see them come back around. And that's the good quality stocks. That's where you have to do your due diligence and your research, talk to people, go to trade shows, get on the internet, read your newspapers, and with that, you should be able to at least weed out the, shall we say, the more junior of the mining stocks.
Can you talk to us a little bit about Silver One's mission and what you're about to accomplish, what your purpose is?
Yes. Well, in essence, Silver One was created, shall we say, in the run-up in the silver markets. And what we've seen is, first and foremost, Silver One came out of a basket of properties that came from a company called First Mining Finance. First Mining Finance is part of a basket of companies that are held by a fellow by the name of Keith Neumeyer, who is the president and CEO of First Majestic. These assets, which are now in Silver One, originally were put into First Majestic. As First Majestic developed into a mining company with 6 producing silver mines in Mexico, it became apparent that these assets, which are very good assets, didn't quite fit that portfolio. So they put them into First Mining Finance in order for First Mining Finance to become a development and exploration silver company based mainly in Mexico. Well, with the economic downturn last year, the decrease in commodity prices, many gold properties in Northern Ontario and Newfoundland became available, and First Mining Finance decided to become a significant holder of gold properties and thus become a gold-oriented company. Again, these assets became redundant to that company, and they decided to create a new silver development and exploration company, and we put those assets into Silver One. So we've got a good basis of assets that we're currently exploring in Mexico. But on top of that, we also have First Mining Finance as one of our largest shareholders and basic supporter, and as such, we are on a growth curve. We are not only trying to grow the company organically by exploring the current properties that we have, which are silver properties in Mexico with resources, but we are also looking at potential acquisitions. There were a lot of junior companies that have very interesting assets that were hurt in the recent downturn, and they are looking for assistance, and we are currently trying to grow the company by potentially acquiring some of those very good assets.
So if anyone considers your outlook and your value, where can they get more details about your company if they want to take a closer look?
Well, you can certainly go on our website, which is www.silverone.com, or you can do some research on us. You look at StockWatch, go and look at our stock price and our stock performance over the last 4 months, which is the period of which we have been trading. We are a very new company, and I just want to make the point that one of the best times to get into a junior company is at the early stages, because that's when the growth potential is the best. And we are a company that is determined to grow, and we have the financial and marketing backing behind us, and we have the assets and the potential acquisition opportunities, and as I said, we are determined to grow. So that's the way to do it. Talk to your brokers. We trade on 3 exchanges. We essentially trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange under the symbol SVE. We trade on the over-counter exchange in the U.S. at SLVRF, and in Frankfurt at BRK1. So you can certainly check us out on those various exchanges as well.
As people try to stay aware and prepared looking forward, they'll go ahead and position themselves as best they can. But as they're watching for signs and signals that things are about to change, are there some specific signals that you watch for that would indicate to you that something big is about to happen for silver, for example?
Well, okay. Let's look at what's coming up very shortly. Is there going to be an interest rate hike? Possibly. Probably. I think that's already been built in to the price of silver and gold. So I'm not sure what's going to happen after that. If there are continued hikes after that, if Mr. Trump does bring about significant infrastructure spending, watch for inflation start ticking up. If your price of bread at the grocery store starts increasing dramatically, I would be starting to worry about what is the future health of the dollar, and I would be thinking about gold and silver.
Greg, before we let you go, are there any other final thoughts you have for our audience?
No, this is a very interesting times. I think all times are interesting to live in, but this one is a period of definite uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen. Trump has made a lot of promises. I personally don't believe he can fulfill them all, and I think that there is going to be continued economic turmoil going forward, and now is the time to be in precious metals.
Well, Greg Crowe, President and CEO of Silver One Resources, thank you very much for joining us this first time here on Reluctant Preppers.
Dunnigan, thank you very much, and hopefully I'll have the opportunity to speak with you again.